Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you're all having a great day and staying safe. I'm Mickey Campo. I'm a program manager at Innovation Guelph. And for those of you new to Innovation Guelph, or IG as we call it, I just wanted to let you know briefly a little bit about us. IG is a nonprofit and is one of a group of regional innovation centers located throughout Ontario. And while we do service the Guelph and Southern Ontario catchment area, we do have programs and services to support innovative and scalable companies of all sizes throughout Canada. So I welcome you to check out our website for more information. It's innovationguelph.ca. But enough about us. Please let me introduce you to today's awesome facilitator, Christy Pettit. Christy is the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Pollinate Networks. And for 25 years, Christy has provided innovative leadership, expert advice, and successful implementation of effectiveness best practices in companies worldwide. An original thinker, Christy's career has involved supporting billion-dollar clients through transformation and leading initiatives to increase employee engagement and success while decreasing overall costs for the businesses. So before I hand things over to Christy, I have just a few housekeeping items to go over with you. The session is being recorded today and it will be live on our YouTube channel in the next 48 hours. All attendees are muted, so we welcome you to turn off your cameras as well. And if you want to interact with us during the session, please do. So if you'd like to ask a question, you can raise your hand option in the lower right corner of your screen, or you can type in your question in the general chat window. You can type your questions to everyone or to me. Again, I'm Mickey Campo, or you can send them to Pollinate Networks directly. And we'll be sure to make sure that Christy gets a chance to answer you today on the phone call. There'll be lots of opportunity for interaction. So we encourage you to ask your questions as you have them, and we will help navigate that conversation as the session goes on. So please don't be shy. Your participation is definitely welcome and is wanted. So without further ado, Christy, over to you.
Thank you so much, Mickey, and thank you to everybody at Innovation Guelph for taking fast action to put these different resources together for us as clients of Innovation Guelph. Pollinate Networks is a proud Innovation Guelph client and has benefited from a lot of mentoring and different programs at Innovation Guelph, so definitely we are also big fans. So thank you so much, Mickey and team, for putting this on for us today. As Mickey said, we would love to have some participation. I know it's awkward, especially with so many of us on a call, but we will try with Mickey's deft Zoom housekeeping, to make sure that any questions that you have get answered. And obviously, if you think of things later, there'll be lots of ways that you can reach out on those as well. But you do use the chat liberally. Your tip of the day is if you are sending private chat notes to someone, just so you know, when it gets downloaded by your program manager, they can see it. Just wanted to give you that tip. Not everybody knows that. But do please interact with us through the chat and raise your hand. Happy to have people jump in as we go through the information today. Before we get started, I wanted to get to know a little bit about the folks that we have here. So I am going to ask you just two questions, and let's see if I'm doing this right. Wes or Amy, can you guys see the poll? Is it up? Can people see it? Yes, it says attendees are now viewing the questions. Great. So do you have a team? I just want to know what size of businesses we happen to have on the phone today. All are beautiful, but are you solo? Are you up to 10, more than 10? And then are you working virtually, and is it new? So those would be helpful things for us to look at. Going to give you a couple more seconds. Okay, we've got some votes coming in. All right. Fantastic. All right, we got half of you in, a little more than half. Here we go. All right, just 10 more seconds to fill in the poll, and then let's take a look at just who we have here with us today. And we will tailor our remarks to the different variety of circumstances that we find ourselves in as we go. All right, 5 more seconds, folks. Get your votes in. All right, so thank you, everybody. Let's have a look at that result. So we do have a number of solopreneurs. We have some folks with teams, and we have some folks with slightly larger teams, different sizes of teams. That's great to know. So we will definitely be thinking about and talking about as we work through effectiveness strategies during this time of tumultuous change, how we can look at it from all of those perspectives. And great to know too that folks are also really moving through the journey of getting virtual. So some folks, about 35% of us, are able to sort of continue on as usual, looks like. Nothing's usual right now, but able to move ahead as per before. So great. Thank you, everybody. We will make sure that we emphasize those areas as we work through our remarks today. So very quickly, just want to make sure that everybody's aware that this is one of a series. I think everybody might know that, but one of a series of talks which Innovation Guelph will make available to you. So if we gather up the learnings that we've had so far, Brad Fitzsimmons talked to us about staying on the business, as well as working in the business in this time of crisis and difficulty. Dr. Paul Radowski did a great session on mental health. So some things I took out of it were recognizing where you have control, where you need to calm yourself, how that's done. That's a good piece, and we'll definitely be dovetailing into that in some of our conversation today. And then Don Thompson did something earlier this week on supporting the product team through Pivot, so that you can get out there and get the sales that you need to get to keep going. So today we're going to talk about effective leadership and what culture looks like through this kind of time, through this motion that we're all going through. And I realize here on the phone, we'll have tons of different experiences and different ways that people are moving through our current situation. And I want to talk particularly and give you a bit of a call to action. The way that I'm looking at this situation that we all find ourselves in the midst of a global pandemic is this. Right now, healthcare workers in food, sanitation, manufacturers who are pivoting to fill domestic supply, these are our frontline workers in this crisis. We're all aware of that. And we want to, no matter where we are in the world or what our business might be set up to do, or what we might be set up to do personally, we do want to help these people as much as we can where we can. But additional to that, we need to think about the fact that we cannot stand by helplessly if we run out of things to do to help our healthcare workers, because we are the next line. We are the next group of people, the engine, if you will, of the nation. And if we think about this as what our task is, as the second line coming in behind the line that's dealing with the crisis right now, we are the folks who employ a lot of the people out in the world in Canada, most of the people in Canada, the great vast majority of people out in Canada. And there has never been a time when we have been more called to lead. So this is an interesting situation for us too, because the reality is we have a workforce that is suffering from what our associates in the Pollinate Network, who are psychology bent people, would call collective trauma. We have words like unprecedented and death toll and crisis and collapse showing up all the time. So on the one hand, we have this workforce that is incredibly impacted thoroughgoingly by what's happening one way or another. But then we also have the reality that people need to work when they can. So we're balancing these two things. They need to work for their mental health, to have a framework for their lives, if it's possible to work now. They need to work for money. They need to work to keep your business going, to feel productive, all of those things. So we're holding those things in tension right now in the small business landscape. And additional for our businesses themselves, so our businesses as collections of people moving forward to do things. Businesses also have collective trauma. All of a sudden, virtual is mandatory. This is new for us. This is not something we were planning to do. It's not something that we expected to happen. Supply chains are stalled in a lot of cases. Conversations are scattered. If you're already mid-conversation with someone, maybe you can pick up that conversation, maybe you can't. It's really hard time to get clients on the phone and keep things moving along. And we're all kind of in a position right now where we're looking at our situation, and this was definitely something that I heard Brad Fitzsimmons say, but really being able to pull back and take some stock. And we're all kind of trying to understand, are we being interrupted, disrupted? Might we erupt? An eruption might be a good thing if you have a new opportunity to pursue. But all of this is happening to us when we are least able to forecast what might happen next in this market. So that's the one hand that we have here. Very challenging time for people, very challenging time for businesses. On the other hand, entrepreneurs are agile. Entrepreneurs are flexible. Entrepreneurs are used to dealing with a lot of BS. Entrepreneurs are used to climbing that hill with all kinds of things on their back. Entrepreneurs are survivors. And our skill set is going to be critical to our country moving forward. We are one of the things that stands between Canada and real economic crisis is how well we are able to bring our skills to bear. So I really want to call us to action with that. And I do want to talk about culture, but I also want to debunk a little bit of the culture conversation. Oftentimes people will say, well, you can't really define culture. You can't really pin it down. What is organizational culture? And that's something that I'm getting asked now, not to reflect on what it is, but more how do I manage people's feelings through this time? So I think, workplace culture on the one hand isn't simple, but it also is not vague and undefinable. Really, your culture is the environments that is the environment that is created by people's perceptions of the business and the resulting behaviors that then create the environment. So what we're trying to do when we think about effective leadership is we want to create a little bit of infrastructure to help people participate effectively. So how do we put things around this cycle of, I see what's going on in the business, I like it or don't like it, I act accordingly, it creates the environment which creates new behaviors. How do we create a little bit of infrastructure around that enables people to really participate in a way that makes that environment feel good? This is going to be very important. I don't think we can't argue that, people who are feeling great at work do a different job than people who aren't. And right now, those good feelings are often really hard for people to find. So it is a critical item. And some of the pieces around effective leadership, that infrastructure, we're going to talk through how we can put some things in place to help that. And if you're like me, right now, it is of concern how people on my team are feeling, how they're doing. And I also have really limited capacity to think about making things great for people. I want it to be great. I want people to be feeling good and moving forward. But I also have fairly limited capacity to do it. So what I did is I created a checklist for us to look at today that sort of pulls together the things that I think are particularly important to pay attention to if we want to be effective in these particular times. So these effectiveness things would obviously be items that at any point might be of benefit to your business or yourself, your employees, the way that you look at things and run things. But at this time, I've pulled out a few of them that I think are particularly critical. So this looks like a lot. Oh my gosh, doesn't she know you're not supposed to put so much on slides? Yes, I do. I wanted you to see the whole thing. And then we're going to break it down into a little bit more of an understandable format. First of all, I just want to point out, we're going to talk about some things that are really important in crisis. Those are our purples at the top of the checklist here. Then we're going to talk about some things that are particularly important for virtual leadership. So our team went virtual officially 2 years ago in terms of our offering. But we've been working mostly virtually or with a lot of virtual organizations or in virtual programs for a while. And these are the things I've really observed that help keep things contained and on track when you cannot physically be together. And then finally, evidence of effectiveness. These are my faves, my 4 faves for if I really had to have a very short list of things that tell me whether an organization and therefore its culture are moving forward with health, these are those things. So a little easier to look at this way, but here they are. And I'm actually going to go through them in the order that you see here, where we're going to talk about tone, then presence and celebration, because there is a little bit of a build here for sure. You're going to notice that I'm not talking about a lot of soft things in terms of, or a lot of soft terms in terms of soft skills, what people are doing in terms of how you're listening or so on, but rather creating that framework. There's lots of great resources out there if you feel you need to buff up a little bit on your own leadership behaviors, and happy to refer to some of those as we go through for sure. So again, please do throw into the comments any chats you have. I'd love to have people illuminate any of this with their own examples. I can tell you what I know, but I'm always learning, so happy to hear from others. So let's jump into the checklist. First thing is tone. First thing is tone. Tone is very, very important to us as entrepreneurs. Tone is like karma. If you have a bad tone one day, it will come back and bite you a couple days later sometimes. And you won't even know where it's coming from. Tone is how you come across. So it may be something about voice for sure, but it's also the tone of your messages, the language that you choose, the way you decide to amplify different things and focus on different things in your language and so on. And what is really important about tone is that we need to have the old analogy that people used to use in mind, which is if you have a very full glass of water and it's sitting on a table and the table shakes, whatever is in that glass is going to come out to some degree, or if people continue to pour things in it. So when we are overwhelmed, when we ourselves are in a place where we are not holding it together particularly well anymore, we need to take a step back and figure out, what do I need? What do I need so that I can have an authentic and balanced tone? What would bring me back into feeling like I'm not resonating at too high a frequency or feeling paralyzed at too low a frequency? So back to Paul Radowski's work on self-care, mental health, and so on. If you are not doing that, you will not always be able to maintain a good tone. And some of us are really good fakers, and that's great, but that takes energy. Right now, you need all your energy to be looking for those opportunities. As Dawn and Brad talked about in their earlier talks, we need to be looking for those opportunities to move our business forward. And we're all going to be moving at different times when we see those opportunities. But having your tone in check is a really important way to keep everyone feeling positive about what's happening, as positive as they can. And again, I'm saying authentic because we got to be real. There's no point in getting on and being excessively sunshiny right now. That will not seem real to people. We definitely need to keep it real. For me also, I asked the second question on the checklist here: can I be gentle when I feel urgent and focused when I'm when I'm needing to be compassionate? And that is because of this. One of the things, we're going to talk about pace in a little bit too. One of the things that I had to learn early on as a manager, leader, and then as a business owner is you can create all kinds of urgency with your tone. And sometimes that urgency is merited and it's needed, and sometimes it's not. So if you're feeling really urgent and racing around, or, I guess people can't see you racing around right now, but people know you're racing around, there's a lot going on, you're creating a lot of urgency with your tone. Is that the right tone for everyone right now? Or is that how you are feeling? So can I create a sense of urgency, which we'll talk about again as we go through the checklist? That's an interesting challenge right now, is when and how to do that. But be gentle about it. Be aware that many people have many, many things going on in their lives. And so can we be gentle about that? And then when I'm being compassionate, can I be focused? People do need room to talk about what it is that's going on in their lives. Can my tone stay patient while people are explaining some of those things that they're experiencing? And can we create little spaces for that and a tone that reflects that? So tone is like, as I say, tone is like karma. If you can keep your self-care in a place where your doom and gloom is, you keep a sense of reality, but not a real sense of doom and gloom, that is going to be reflected back to you. So it's a really key piece. And for you solopreneurs, the way that, you're coming across to clients and so on, again, that realness, but also a sense that you have a control of your tone. You understand how you're coming across, how it sounds, and is it something that's garnering the reaction that you want? All right, I'm going to blast ahead. Again, people, please do use the chat. I might volunteer some people to say something. So make sure you're paying attention. Oops, sorry, I went ahead too far. There we go. Presence. I already talked a little bit about being present, but this is really key, especially when we are virtual, because there's no sort of ambient, I'm around somewhere, I'm in the office somewhere, or I'm moving back and forth within people's line of sight. Leadership presence now is about actual time with people. You don't get that nice margin of time where we're co-located but not actually interacting. We don't have that anymore. We don't have the walk by water cooler kind of conversations or whatever that looked like in your reality available to us at this time. So you need to actually be present with anybody that you're managing in your business, or make sure that your managers are being present with people really regularly. What's regularly? Is it every day? Is it every week? Really up to you and that person. And you will, of course, all of you, I know, be bringing teams together if you have teams or collaborators in any case. But really, this has to be based on your need and theirs. Some people are going to need more of you. Some people are going to need more time to go away and really process. One of the folks on our team, Amy Strachan, who's on the phone here with us today, Amy reminded me, because she always works virtual, that she's actually seeing a lot more of us than normal, because she's not always in the office, and the rest of us often are coming and going from the office. So everybody's going to need something a little different. Having some sensitivity to what that is going to be important for sure. And it can slip quickly. I don't know if you folks are finding this, but time is a very strange thing during a crisis. Sometimes it feels like the hours are just creeping by, but then I look and a month has passed. So it is very important to make sure that you're tracking along regularly with people. You're making extra time. Again, I know your capacity is limited, but believe me, this will save time later. You're making extra time for those things that are new, people that have less experience, when plans change. When plans change, we'll talk about that too. You must be really clear about the plans changing. We lose a lot of meaning and a lot of steam and a lot of good energy when we're making a change and people are still going the way they thought. So those are really important things to take time on. And also, if you're like me and very task focused, you may find that you forget to ask about wellness. How's your family? How are things that, again, may or may not have been part of your regular chatter with people before, but it definitely needs to be something that you are having some thought process to, for sure. Great question here. Can you tell us about how we should be communicating with our team who we've had to lay off? That's an excellent question. And I think that it depends on the situation that you find yourself in, whether it's going to be something permanent, something shorter term. You may not know at this point. I think one of the things that we've got to be really, really clear on is that people do require a lot of step-by-step instruction right now. And that kind of goes with the intentionally spending time. And in these extremely unfortunate, difficult, emotional circumstances, your ability to be present when you are having conversation with that person and shut off all other distractions is going to be super important. Your ability to, wherever you can, and I see Innovation Guelph has a ton of good resources up on the website. That might be one place to look. Provide any guidance that you can step by step for people. One of the things that people lose track of when their brain is on fire with all the difficult things that are happening right now is, what do I need to do in what order? So if there are ways to support that team that's going through real transition, that's been very disrupted, with some specific steps on what to do next, that would be very, very helpful. We do have some folks who do mediation, Krista Renner and others on the line right now too, that again, Krista, if you want to check anything in, there are others who have suggestions. I think there are some really, really difficult moments that we're all facing around having conversation in ways that we normally wouldn't. What do we say to the rest of the team if there are still people here? How do we include people who are laid off in things and not include them in things? How do we care for them? Those are all things that you need to map out based on your specific situation, but step-by-step instructions are going to be super important for people, with some resource there. And then again, that tone and tenor is going to be really important as well. All right, so I'm going to keep moving. I'm going to circle back to that one though, because I think that's important. And I know Mickey made some allowances for time at the end, so we might get some other folks to unmute and speak into that, who have experience with that, because I do think that some of these difficult questions are the ones we as entrepreneurs need to be supporting each other with best practices around these things for sure. Other thing on our leadership checklist is around celebration. So how do we actually make sure that we mark meaningful events for people? Do we have meaningful events to celebrate? This is actually a really important piece that goes on in people's minds. I'm sorry, I keep going ahead by accident there. I'm swiping my mouse around too much. Sorry about that. We make little markers in our heads around events that signal positive or negative. And a celebration, a meaningful celebration, not something you cooked up that, is nice, but it's not really meaningful to the team, meaningful to yourself. Can we find those? That gives a marker that, oh, this is something successful. This is something positive. So where we can do those things, super important to do them wherever we can. And Brady Wilson, who's one of our network partners, also at Pollinate, I've talked about a couple of those so far, talks a lot about, Brady's at Juice, and talks a lot about the fact that brain science here is very important for us. When we are stressed, and I'm going to shortcut this enough, if you are a neuroscientist, I sincerely apologize because I know I am briefing something that is actually a rich, deep topic. But on the one side, stress hormones, we have cortisol running through our veins, running through our brains. And if we can bring some appreciation in, the science tells us that gratitude, appreciation actually bathes our brain in dopamine and other positive chemicals. So can we possibly pause the cortisol, the stress hormones for a moment to have some true appreciation? Again, bit of an art form here, leaders. Don't want to be making things up to appreciate necessarily. We want to find things that authentically we can look at, but it does put a marker in people's brains that, oh, there's something to celebrate. That's a good thing. Let's keep moving on that. So the celebration, we don't want to lose track of it, even though things are difficult right now. And again, meaningful doesn't mean huge. It just means meaningful. Trust. We talk a lot about the speed of trust, and given that time is such a weird thing right now in crisis, trust is an interesting thing as well for folks. And there's a couple of things that you really need to think about if you want to be effective at this time relative to trust. And some of it has to do with, someone brought up, what do we say to people who've been laid off? Well, being trustworthy, respectful, showing them the absolute most respect that you can and the best help you can give. Is a really respectful, trusting, trustful, trust-making way to be behaving right now. And we need to be aware, are all the things that we're doing, creating and building trust. There's some interesting things happening in teams that have a few more people where we might have had private conversations before. Now more things are coming out in the open. Is it being handled in a way where people still feel that things are trustworthy and they're able to have audience with you on their own? Those are all important trust things that we would normally have in place. In a crisis, we also need to be very aware that trust is actually also about accountability. So one of the things that we note when in crises is it's really interesting to try to see what it is that people are supposed to be doing. We're going to talk about priorities in just a moment. But where are the accountabilities and how do we know people are doing them? This is a really important piece because to build trust within the team, we need to make sure we're right-sizing people's tasks and giving them a chance to do them, making sure that they're able to bring things to completion. So are we able to trust our system, as well as are we acting in a trustworthy way? So those are two important things in crisis, is that trust takes on a little bit of a different meaning. It's not just about whether I think you're a good guy and you're going to do right by me. It's also, are you getting the things done that we've agreed to do? More important than ever in a crisis, for sure. The next thing on the checklist is about precedent. So, quick whirlwind tour on the idea of complexity and complexity theory. For those who are immersed in that, you will know that the way that systems tend to evolve is they start simple, they get complicated, then they get complex, and then we find ourselves in chaos. And my friends, this is where we find ourselves today. We are in a really chaotic market where we can't judge what's going to happen next. We don't know if people are going to be re-engaging sooner, later, midterm. We're really not sure what's going to happen. So what works in chaos? What actually works in chaos? We got pretty good at complexity because we've been working in complexity a long time, where there's all kinds of stakeholders and businesses exist in an ecosystem, not just by themselves on a corner necessarily. So what happens when we move over into chaos? What happens when we move over into chaos is we actually have to create things to react to. So that's about setting precedent. So you may be already down the path on trying new systems in your team, working on things that people can get their heads around of, okay, yeah, we're going to meet every other day, or we're going to do something that I can see as a precedent. We're setting something down that's a new way of doing things. You will be wanting to set precedent in terms of your offering. And I think that's a lot of what our IG mentors have talked about in this series so far, is where is there an opportunity for you to get out there with your skill set, with something new, or setting a precedent to say, this is a new best practice, this is a new way of doing things. So we're doing that in our business. For our clients, how do we do it inside our businesses? Can we identify even small new ways of working that work and keep pursuing those? Can we lock it in so that people say, this is, here's a precedent, we're going to start doing this, here we go, we're going to move forward with this? And can we adjust it without starting over all the time? This is a little bit of parenting folklore for you, but I'm a classic mom with the new sheriff in town. When I get really mad because things aren't cleaned up or whatever, I'm going to set a precedent and I'm going to come in there and, we're going to do things differently here forward. And I dare say that we probably don't want a role model after my new sheriff in town, because sometimes the new sheriff in town has to have a restart. And one thing that is very true for virtual teams and teams going through crisis and change is the fewer restarts, full restarts we have, the better. We don't want to, they start feeling like false starts, like we tried something and it didn't work. And that's a frustrating thing. We want to instead position this as, we're going to try a new best practice and we're going to iterate it together to make sure it works. And then we're locking it in so everybody's clear what we're looking for here in terms of doing something new. Sometimes you actually just have to go back over stuff that you've always been doing, but make it more deliberate, make it more obvious. So you solopreneurs out there, not to downgrade this on your list too, this is your opportunity to be thinking about what precedents do you want to set in terms of a new way of doing things, a new way of presenting things, a new way of looking at things. Start looking for those precedents. And I do know everybody's still getting through the shock of what's happening, but as you find your feet under you, as you start to feel like you're able to think about planning, this is a good way to think. There is never been a time like this in our lifetime. So we, the entrepreneurs, just like the healthcare workers going before us, we're the ones who are going to set new precedent for how things work moving forward along with our customers. So super important to have that mindset as we work our way through this. So if you've hung around agile people at all, software developers or some of the folks who work on the idea of the agile modality of doing things in a flexible format with some rules around it, you'll know about capacity. And what I mean by capacity is literally how much can people do? How much capacity do they have to act? And at all times, anytime, evidence of effectiveness in an organization that I go into is in part, people know, the leaders know who has some and what is their capacity. So what are the capabilities inside that? Who doesn't have any because they're over capacity or they're not skilled to do something that they need to be doing. And then how do I know? How do we see evidence of that? So that's something good to know always. As we've already identified, people's capacity is already going to be lower. People's capacity generally, and this is not to a person, is going to be taken up in some form by all the different things that we're being exposed to in the ether, all the different things that we know are going on around us. Not just the news. The news itself is enough of an obsession for many of us that I see most people are having to be really deliberate about clocking off their social media, but also the complexity that I know many of you will be facing. Kids home that you've got to homeschool. There's some wild and crazy stories coming out about parents trying to work their way through that and erroneously being on classrooms and doing different things. We have parents in a lot of cases, folks who have aging parents or parents who need extra care. Super important there. The problems we had before that, kid with special needs or, any issues that we may have encountered in life, any of our staff, any of us, they don't go away because of a crisis. They may be amplified. Things may be even more complicated. And then we also have, which goes along with our being present, we have people whose capacity is actually a little bit less because they're lonely. They don't have people to go home to. They may have more capacity or that may actually be a distraction. So our sensitivity to the things that are taking up capacity and still having a clear view. Who has capacity? Who doesn't have capacity right now? Really critical for being able to move forward on anything that you can move forward in the business, for sure. Timing, this is a tough one. And I really like at Eagles Flight, I used to have the privilege of working with that group of folks. Phil Geldart used to always say equal onus, which means that when we think about responsibility for something or accountability, that both parties, the leader and the person who's being led, the team member, have equal onus for making things work in terms of relationship, in terms of the work environment, and so on. But we as leaders do have a special responsibility to keep the timing right. And that means particularly as business owners, sometimes we have to be a container or a compartment for things that people are not able to take on right now. Things that you might have normally dealt with right away, got right on top of, and that is a best practice. If you need to give feedback, to be right in there with it. Sometimes it's just not the right time right now. If a mistake happens, maybe right away is the time to talk about it. Maybe people's emotional capacity, as we just talked about, is not in a place where they can take that information in. They're not in the place where they can really hear you, or hearing you is going to add something so negative to them that it's not worth doing right now. And I'm not saying forget about it. I'm saying put it on a list and figure out when you can talk about it. Figuring out the right times to talk about issues and mistakes, super important. Really important to think about, as I said, figuring out the right time to change plans. We actually say in some of our work around achieving goals that if we leave stuff on the to-do list that, is relative to a priority that's changed, we end up with sort of zombie tasks that eat our brain. We think we need to get that done, but actually that's changed. So as leaders, really important to know that the timing and the ability for people to take in changes and plans is really, really critical. Really critical. So sometimes, as much as we want people to take equal onus, we want people to, you know, step into the responsibility they can. You as the business owner, you as the leader, you're the one who's going to need to decide when issues get dealt with. And that cadence, that feeling, that openness, that capacity to take on those issues is going to have to be monitored pretty carefully. So you may have to find different ways than what you would normally have done to bring those issues forward, for sure. And always try to be really mindful of, can you tell people as much as possible? So again, we don't want to be fettering people with all kinds of information that is things they can't do anything about, or it's just going to concern them or whatever, but people will make things up. In a vacuum, nature abhors a vacuum. In a vacuum, people will make things up. So we really need to make sure that wherever we can, we're being clear and we're keeping people informed on a timely basis. Timing is a lot. You may be noticing that between, you know, Monday and Thursday, there have been all kinds of things happen that have created different feelings, different perceptions, and so on. So keeping things sort of in contained pieces of time are going to be really important for your culture right now, so that people don't feel lagging behind. I do have a couple of clients we're working with, and one of the issues is, of necessity, we have a command center group who are working through the priorities of the business and figuring it out. Everybody else is starting to feel like an appendage, though. So we got to make sure that in terms of keeping the culture whole, we're either being really honest and saying there's not stuff for you to do right now. How are we going to work with that? Or keeping people up to speed and ensuring that they are doing what they can do, for sure. Talked a lot already about priorities, but just to reiterate, there is absolutely nothing more important for your business right now in terms of effectiveness than you are working on the right things. And I think, again, Dawn and Brad said that overlappingly in their talks, but is it very clear what is paused, what is stopped, and what is urgent? My team and I go through priorities every day right now. We're, you know, sometimes it's different groups of us, but we do have a roundup on priorities every day. That might extend out to more time in between right now. But we're finding, even with our bent on effectiveness, that we do have some tasks that pop up that people are going to address where we say, whoa, well, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like a priority right now. Not that it's not good work, not that it's not important work, not that we don't appreciate what you've already done on it. We absolutely do, but it's going to need to be parked for a period of time while we work through some other things. Got to be really clear what the priorities are for the business so people can do some of that filtration themselves. We're not always going to be meeting every day. We want to get our feet under us and get people, you know, working along. But how can we make sure that people know if stuff has been paused, cleared out, and then what's urgent? This is another tricky bit in that sometimes we do have a huge sense of urgency, particularly as the business owners, particularly as the leaders who have visibility to absolutely everything that's going on. We've got to make sure we contain that urgency and put the right tone on it, but also be really, really clear. These are the things that are mattering most right now. And then, does each individual have priorities? Again, if there isn't work for people right now, how are we addressing it? What does that look like? Lots of different things organizations are doing. Some folks are focusing on developing people. Some folks have had to lay off. Some people are in different positions depending on what their business is. But can we get down to the individual level so that people feel that they are being able to be effective, even if you have to right size their tasks for the capacity that they have? Also a priority to take a break. I know this checklist is a bit overlapping and there are things that relate to each other, but really, really, really crucial that we build in breaks right now. Some people's impetus is to go, 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 go. This is how they deal with crisis. Some people are paralyzed. We've got to be able to make sure that both are getting breaks and that we actually schedule them in as priorities. Another real harbinger of effectiveness is, are we getting things done? Jean Russell, who's one of our advisors in our network that we've worked with in the past, has a great t-shirt/mug you can get off Redbubble that says "Addicted to Done." We have love to get things completed. We love to ship in our businesses, of course. We love to see things happening. And there is a really, really, really important corollary to effectiveness is, can we bring things to completion even when we have some trauma going on? If we are not bringing things to completion, and again, if you've been in Agile and you see that things are stuck in work in progress and things aren't moving all the way through, why is that? Let's take a look at what's happening. If it's the sheer trauma, we may have to back up, retool, and figure out how we build some capacity around that. Is it that we're not communicating? Is it that we just need to be right-sizing the task to smaller things so we can see more discrete things getting done? It's a good thing to celebrate. We already talked about celebration, but it's also really important to be reflecting. One of the things that we find in crisis is, depending on our style, depending on how we deal with things in general, we really, really are impeded in our focus, whether we feel fine or not. And some of us who've already been through significant trauma in our lives, we are finding the research is showing that, you know, people who've been through significant trauma have a different response to this trauma than folks who haven't. So we're all coming at it from a different place. But if we're never truly getting a check mark personally, or if others aren't, then, you know, we aren't truly effective. We're not really getting it done. And again, we circle back to, very soon we start feeling like we don't have meaning. Very soon we start to not have things to celebrate. So can we right-size the tasks so that we're getting stuff done, so that we can see others are getting stuff done? And how do you know? You need to have some kind of visual tracking system right now on this, folks. So if you don't already have a way of tracking to-dos that's fairly visual, where people can see it, you can see it, now's the time to put something in place. We don't have the luxury anymore of having our Kanban boards or our to-do boards with Post-its, I guess, unless we take pictures of them. But a spreadsheet, Trello cards, whatever way you can know that things are getting done and observe them getting done, are going to be really, really important right now to show us that, okay, we are moving some things forward, even if it's on a different basis than what we might normally do. All right, we're rounding the corner here, and then I do want to get into some discussion. Tolerance. Tolerance. I've already talked about how people have different margins for dealing with this. Some people personally, and just like some businesses, have lots of reserve, and some of us are more flying by the seat of our pants here. But we as leaders are going to need to dig very deep for some tolerances. So again, people may be at home with their kids for the first time, trying to teach them, trying to do things, have a parent they're trying to negotiate with in terms of making sure care is happening and they might not be at hand. All kinds of situations are creating complexity in people's lives. So first of all, your tolerance needs to be up for it. How are people expressing that? How is the trauma of this situation working it through in their lives? So some people may be having a much harder time with it than what you are. Some people may be having a much harder time with it than others. And your ability to sort of tolerate either side is going to be super important right now. That patience you have for, if people are lagging focus or having trouble with focus, lagging in terms of getting things done, you're going to need to have more tolerance for right now. And as I said, around timing, find ways to discuss how might I help? But there just is a huge margin of grace for each other that we need to put around this. And I think part of that is expanding tolerance in the team for some of the tensions you're going to be experiencing. So, you know, some of you are experiencing severe tension in terms of having to lay people off, in terms of having to make very difficult business decisions, and lots of us going through those kinds of machinations and figuring those things out. Those are some very severe tensions. There are other tensions too that are coming up. One is this whole idea of, you know, my mind is completely blown. I don't know really what the future looks like. I've got all these complexities now in my life, but you want me to be productive. That's a tension. So can we talk about that? Can we look at that? It may be a tension, just how do we work together? Do we understand our collaboration styles and how they show up virtually? Are there tensions on the team that you need to address? Those are the kinds of things, again, when we think about tolerance, really creating a buffer of grace around some of the extra tension that'll be in the ether. And I'm not saying this is easy, guys. I'm just saying in terms of an aspirational checklist, these are some of the things that you might look at and say, I could use a bit of work on that. Again, my call to action is just try to grab one or two things that you could really think about there. Pace. So we always have had the belief that pacing is the leader's job. How fast do we go? What does that look like? Is everybody with us? On a virtual team, this is even more important because unlike in the office or in a regular sort of stream of work where people may be coming and going, you would maybe have the meeting after the meeting to kind of clarify with some people as to whether they're sort of keeping up with things, whether they're aware and feeling like they're integrated into the workflow. So how do I know if my pace is wrong? Well, I tend to go really, really fast, not just in crisis, but generally. And in crisis, it gets more frantic for me. I have to be very careful I'm not inappropriately signaling urgency when I don't mean urgency for everybody. But I always know my pace is off when I look around and no one's with me. I'm kind of way out here on my own with an idea, but everybody's back there working on something else or wondering what it is that I'm on about now. So making sure that people are aligned and with you, making sure that you have people reflect back. Okay, are you with me? This is what we're moving on. Let's move ahead. Tolerance for the fact that you may plan on a certain pace and it may have to be moderated a little bit. If people are charging ahead, some people have the impetus to really move when things are hitting the fan. They really get out of the blocks and do things quickly. Are they doing the right things? Can you support them to work ahead a little bit if that's appropriate for the business? And then finally, once again, if people are behind, what's the reason for it? Do they need breaks? Can they get one? Can you do it in kind of keep working, but kind of in a relay fashion? That's a bit more what our team's been doing of when people have that day, which we've all had. Yesterday seemed like a day like that for a lot of people where we all were a little bit out of energy for the positive and felt very weighted down by what's going on in the world. Can we squeak out some work but still give people breaks as we move along? So the pace setting piece of your role hasn't changed, but the paying attention to where people are at is going to be even more important as you're virtual. There's less cues in the environment for people to watch to figure out what pace they should be working at. Last thing I want to talk about, and then I really, really, really want to hear from you guys, is coordination. And, you know, one of the things, we've talked a ton about connection on here and connecting with people in a bunch of different ways. Connection is huge. Connection is important. Collaboration is also big and important. And I know that the mentors talked about you need to have the best brains. Again, our job in saving the world and saving, you know, the economy as much as we can contribute to that is really, you know, understanding how our capabilities, the things that we've built through our entrepreneurial journey can be applied to this situation. But there is a moment at which collaboration gets too much. And there's an interesting body of research out there that we've encountered in our live work with people in the real world, or the meat space, as some people call it, where we're physically together, in workplaces where over collaboration happens. Everybody's in on everything and it gets way too much. Everybody doesn't need to be in on everything. So we do want collaboration for sure, but can we make it a coordinated effort? Do we feel like people are working together well? Do you see evidence when you are listening to your team and working with your team and hearing your team that, oh, those guys actually got together and did something and it worked out well? Great. Teams working together well. Do they feel like they're working together well? Can you ask what would have to happen for us to feel like we're working together well? You need to know that people feel that way. And also keep your balanced view. I'm trying to poll people on all kinds of things all the time, and they may be feeling one way one day and one the next. So look for that prevailing wind. What evidence do we have of how people might be feeling in terms of coordination of effort. Again, this is a critical evidence of effectiveness for your organization. And again, if you're a solopreneur, you may be coordinating with other suppliers, stakeholders, partners. Is the coordination working? Is it going well? And if it's not, are we getting in there as leaders early enough to say what would have to happen for us to feel like we have a more coordinated effort? So that's a tremendous amount of talking on my part. And I don't know how successful I was, but I was also making a Herculean effort not to touch my face. So we'll find out in the video whether or not I did that successfully. In closing off what I wanted to say, it's super important for you to think about what matters right now. I completely appreciate how much capacity is getting used up just by surviving, living, moving through day to day for so many people right now. So are there one or two things, and then the tool is totally available to you in this presentation to look at. Are there one or two things on it where you could make a real dent and a difference? And what's one step you could take now to move into your preferred vision of the future? Is there one or two things you could focus on that would amplify the effectiveness of your team or yourself at this time? So with that, I am not sure that I can see all the questions. Wes or Amy, do you folks want to pop up any questions that we might have gotten along the way so that we can chat them through with the group? Let's see here. All right. Okay, I did want to circle back to the, how do we communicate with our team that we've had to lay off? In terms of communicating to people who've already been laid off, there are some legalities around that you should definitely talk to somebody who's immersed in that. But reaching out in compassion and being able to keep people in the loop is definitely something that I know a lot of our clients and folks are looking at. Are there any other folks who want to comment on that, who are going through that or have something to say about that particular thing? Because that is a tender thing for us right now. Anyone? I know Mickey said this is usually a fairly quiet crowd, so if you feel moved, please don't hesitate to jump on. Okay, I don't see anyone jumping in just now, but that's okay. That's all right. In terms of other questions that we want to look at, so in terms of being able to be present with each person, one of the questions that I had received was, here's another good one. It's very similar. What are the best ways to show my employees that I care about their mental well-being? And I am going to come back to that first thing of presence. If you are able to be present with people, if you are able to take a specific amount of time, even if it's not a huge amount of time, and make it just for them, that's going to be super important. Many of us who are at the smaller end of the scale don't have license to go out and create programs or, have therapists standing by, but there are tons of resources out there right now, many of which I think are highlighted on the Innovation Guelph website, that provide for free assistance. So there are therapists offering assistance for free and so on. But I do think being present, I think being extremely aware of your timing, again, not bringing things up when people might be at their weakest that are going to challenge them further. That also shows a real care for people's well-being. And I do think also the whole tone that you take, back to the tone thing, if you have in your mind that you care about this person's well-being, it will show in your tone. And when we are so busy and so taxed with things that are going on, sometimes it's hard to have that tone, but definitely keep it in the back of your mind. It's like call center people who are trained to smile when they're talking. I'm not suggesting you think about smiling when you're talking, but get centered on the fact that you're really going to focus on this person before you get on with them. Here's an interesting one. Would it be better to lay off a single employee or keep everyone at reduced pay and workload? So I think that that's a fantastic question from the perspective of the types of puts and takes, the things that people have got to be thinking about as entrepreneurs. The answer, of course, is it depends. It really depends on what it is that you need in terms of capacity to deliver your offer. So if there is one person who is able to, along with yourself, deliver everything that you need to deliver, when you lay out what the market seems to be asking from you and the capacities that you have, then you may want to look at that one person as your one person. When you do that, you also need to consider the risks that you're undertaking. Then you have singular dependency. So it may be a good strategy, but it also begets risks. Same on the other hand. So if you decide to keep everyone at a reduced pay and workload, see a lot of companies doing that right now, reducing down from full-time hours to part-time hours, trying to keep people in the game and whole somehow. If you are able to really make sure that, again, you're coordinating amongst people, that may be a very important strategy for you as well. That doesn't beget the risk of having a single dependency, but does mean your effort is spread out a little bit more. You're going to have to work hard at keeping everybody feeling like they're really in touch with each other, for sure, when you bring them together. It's a good one. Anybody else want to jump in on that? I know we got a lot of experts on the phone and we got a little bit of time. Anybody else want to input into that? We can unmute you. Just put your hand up on any of these questions. All right. I'm going to wait for hands to come up if there are other experts on the call who want to, or, you know, anybody. We're all experts in entrepreneurship here. That's for sure. We're just like black belt. Black belt means beginner. So even for those who've been at it a while, we're always learning. Another question. What tools do you recommend for keeping in touch with your team when working from home? That is something that we have some strong preferences of Pollinate. We use Zoom a lot. We used to love Zoom. Now I think I'm a bit burned out on Zoom, like many people. Actually, I was talking to Krista Renner. I mentioned Krista before, who's one of the folks who does mediation and other fantastic things in our network. That, you know, we all were so excited about Zoom, but now it's getting a bit painful because you're on it so much. But Zoom is definitely something we use. We also fall back to Hangouts. If Zoom, for whatever way, is not behaving, we use Google Hangouts. We do use Trello. We use Trello rather excessively in our business. So we do have some sort of just a feeder system for our overarching business management, where all our data comes in and we're able to see, you know, what's going in and what's coming out. But Trello is great if you're inclined at all to have people sharing tasks and being able to coordinate, because you can have a team view. So you can share boards and look at things in different ways. So I know there are many different tools out there, but that's a big one for us for sure, is to have a Trello board intact. And we also, of course, use the Pollinate platform, which is a way that we share information and really focus on things that we want to learn and get the information out on. So those are a few things that we look at for sure. I've also heard of there's a lot of positive around the Microsoft Team for some people. Some people don't like Microsoft, but Microsoft Team seems to be working well for a number of clients. So there are various different platforms out there to try. Lots of different people unearthing different favorite apps for sure. Yes, and actually, great. Someone just noted Microsoft Teams, which is a really important one for sure. All right. I think the other thing that that's been suggested that we don't want to forget about is the simplicity of a phone call. So if we want to show people we care, if we want to go back to some basics, if we want to really make sure that people are feeling included and get a sense of personal connection, a phone call is a great way to do it. So a bit of a blast from the past, but just a simple back to basics phone call can be really, really, really important as you are trying to walk the talk in your practice and stay connected with people. Great questions, guys. Thank you. Thank you for those. Any other questions, moderators, that we need to address as we're going through here? I don't see any others. So we're at 3:36. Mickey, I know you made extra time for additional questions. I'm happy to stay on and speak to people individually if that's helpful to people. Or are there other things that we wanted to address today, Mickey?
Just that if people are going to go, your next slide there, Christy, I think is the sessions that are upcoming. So if people are going to hop off the call now, just please know we still have 2 more sessions next week. We have April 15th is the PR strategy during COVID-19. So how to talk, communications, and public relations. So what do you say to people? That's with Melissa Durrell on April 15th at 2:30. And then we have a panel of business leaders that have lived through different situations like this, some kind of crisis in the past, and survived on the other side. So it's going to be some really interesting stories and tips to share with people and offer some hope. So that's next Friday. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
so
Awesome. There was one more question, Mickey, I just want to address before we officially close off and invite people to hang out if they want to. And that's, how do you keep people motivated who are working very few hours in a week? And that is a fantastic question and something important to think about. Again, we want to avoid people feeling like appendages or afterthoughts. So are there ways where you can make a deliberate attempt to take a little bit of their time? I know when someone's working 10 or less hours a week, their time is extremely precious to you, but can you overlap any of those team check-ins into their time so they're getting at least a little section of the team every week in a deliberate fashion? But very important. Those people can be really key to the business, and we do want to make sure they have some sense of what's going on, given that there might be quite a lot going on when they're not available. Thank you for that question, and for sure. And yes, somebody just suggested that, doing development for people who are part-time workers. So actually taking the time, if you are able, to help them do some upskilling. Now could be a time for that. Again, not everybody has the luxury to do that, but for those who do, it might be a good time to really look at that. So thank you for contributing that. Absolutely. All right, Mickey, back over to you.
All right. So with 22 people left on the call, I'd just like to say thank you for joining us today. I hope that everyone is going to have a healthy and wonderful but quiet indoors kind of long weekend. Stay healthy and stay happy, and I hope the Easter Bunny or whatever kind of lovely weekend treats you're having are good for you. But for right now, Christy, thank you so much for joining us today and talking about effective leadership. I think that everybody has multitudes of things to take home, and maybe that's why they're so quiet right now, is they're still trying to process all the things.
So one more question around volunteers.
Absolutely. So anyone who wants to stay on the call, please do. There's a few people left. Please turn on your mics. Let's have a conversation.
Absolutely. So if the person's still on who was asking about volunteers, it's a great question. And it is a really different workforce in a way, but it is really, really crucial, particularly from what I'm hearing from my clients, especially in volunteer heavy fields, is, communication lines are important. The other thing is, if volunteers are still active with you in any way, that they have a really strong sense of where your safety head is at, so that you're very committed to keeping them safe. You're very committed to ensuring that they understand what you understand in terms of any risks to the business, and that, you continue to appreciate their efforts. But I think one of the things that's probably most interesting in the whole HR space right now for us is having honest, open conversation with people about safety and preferences. So people who are called to work right now because they may be in a position where they are in an essential service role, but they feel worried because they have immunosuppressed people at home, or they're not 100% sure that the organization is taking it all seriously. And it's been a very similar sort of commentary around volunteers is that if volunteers feel safe and well communicated to, less issues. But where we do leave openings for ourselves is when we don't really describe things that are going to be very, very top of mind for them, for sure. So great question. Great question. Bears a lot of thinking. Bears thinking from the perspective of, you know, with so many people losing their jobs, will it change volunteerism? How will that look? How will it feel for us as we go forward? All right, I see someone on an iPhone unmuted. Please, somebody say something. Anyone?
This is a question about workforce, and I'm wondering about taking the temperature before the workday and the HR implications around that, and whether or not there's some mixed advice as to whether or not employer can ask that of their employees. So some insight on that would be really helpful.
For sure. So you mean actually physically taking people's temperatures?
No, like there's different things that are happening where people have to submit their temperature by a certain time every day, or they just tell you that they've taken their temperature. There's one organization where everyone has their own thermometer and they take their temperature in the morning and kind of show it to the rest of the team because that's where the comfort level is with that particular team.
Yeah.
So,
well, it's interesting.
People are approaching it in different ways.
For sure. And I believe that, and again, there may be some legalities around this that we should look into more deeply. But based on what I'm understanding, and particularly from the healthcare folks that I have been talking to and working with, is people are actually feeling generally more safe with having to report in with temperatures than impeded upon. So we do have to be very sensitive to people's personal information, how much we're asking them to record and so on. But at today, the prevailing wind seems to be that people actually appreciate that more than they feel impeded upon by it. I don't know if that's something different than what you're experiencing. And I'm sorry I didn't catch your name who asked the question.
It's Karen, and
okay.
that was my impression, and that's what I've just been speaking to some.
You cut out there for a second, Karen. Can you just repeat that last sentence again?
I just don't have a perspective of someone with more of an HR lens. That's
for sure.
why I'm asking that question.
No, it's a great question. And what I'm hearing is right now there's a ton of tolerance for it. People are feeling safer with that happening. There's very few people who aren't complying or have an issue with it. But I think it's a really important question that Karen's raised, because what we're tolerating right now may not be how people are feeling a month from now. They may feel more excited about us knowing more data on them a month from now because it feels like it's keeping them safe. But some people are starting to get very nervous about employers having a great deal more information on them. So it's one to watch, Karen. Right now, I would say that people who are doing it are getting a good response, but it may boomerang around on us before long. Yeah, for
okay,
sure.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Any other questions? What a great group. I hope it was helpful for some people. It was really helpful for me putting it together, that's for sure.
Well, I think it was helpful for us flipping through your slides last night too.
Good.
Listening to you today, so I think there's been lots of good tips shared.
Excellent. Well, if people do think of things after the fact, if you're lying awake or you're in the shower and something pops up, again, you can get a hold of me through Innovation Guelph. Just look at my email on the presentation and shoot me a note. Happy to talk as much as possible. Super helpful for me to know what's going on in people's minds and how they are finding their journey toward trying to create some effectiveness at this time when just surviving seems to be what's on the menu for a lot of people. So absolutely stay in touch, folks.
That's great. Thanks, Christy.